An Airbus A320 was plunging through a violent storm at cruising altitude. The captain had slumped over the controls. His heart stopped. The co-pilot's hands shook so badly he could barely grip the yoke. 174 passengers screamed in absolute hysteria, and the only person stepping forward to help was a skinny 16-year-old black boy in a worn-out t-shirt. Before he could reach the cockpit door, a flight attendant shoved him backward and hissed, "Disgusting little rat. A filthy little brat like you dares to rush into the cockpit. You want to kill everyone faster? Is that it?" He did not flinch. He simply looked her straight in the eyes, calm and steady. She had no idea who this boy really was, and when she found out, she would collapse to her knees in tears. How did a homeless black orphan become the last hope for Flight 2136? Miami, Florida. A city of sunlight, cruise ships, and million-dollar condos lining the coast. But several miles from those glittering beaches, tucked behind check-cashing stores and a laundromat with a broken sign, sat the Overtown neighborhood, one of the oldest and poorest black communities in the American South. This was where Isaiah Ellison grew up, if you could call it growing up. Isaiah never knew his father. His mother, Lorraine Ellison, was a young waitress who died of pneumonia when he was just a small child. She could not afford the hospital bill and waited days before going to the emergency room. By then, her lungs were already drowning. Isaiah remembered only one thing about her: the smell of cocoa butter on her hands when she held his face and whispered, "Baby, you are going to fly someday." He was too young to understand, but those words buried themselves deep in his chest and never left. After Lorraine died, Isaiah entered the foster care system. 12 years, 7 homes. Some were neglectful, some were cruel. In one, the foster father locked him in a garage for days over a broken plate. In another, the foster mother collected the checks and fed him canned beans and stale bread. By his early teens, Isaiah had learned one rule: nobody is coming to save you. But he had something no foster home could take: an obsession with the sky. It started when he was a young child, and a commercial jet flew low over Overtown. The roar shook his ribs. The silver belly reflected the sun like a second god passing overhead. He stared until his eyes burned. From that moment, something locked onto the sky like a compass finding north. He spent every free hour at the Miami Public Library, devouring aircraft manuals, aerodynamics textbooks, and pilot memoirs. The librarian, an older Haitian woman named Mrs. Simone Laurent, once found him asleep at closing time with his face pressed against a copy of Stick and Rudder. She did not wake him. She simply draped her cardigan over his shoulders and let him sleep. By his early teens, Isaiah could identify any commercial aircraft by silhouette. He knew the fuel capacity of a Boeing 787, the crosswind limits for an A320, the exact sequence for an emergency engine shutdown. He memorized cockpit recordings from YouTube, every call-out, every checklist. His foster siblings thought he was strange. His teachers ignored him. Isaiah did not care. The sky was the only place he belonged. Then everything changed. A retired Air Force captain named Theodore Grant walked into the Overtown Community Center. Captain Grant was in his 70s, dark-skinned, silver-haired, his back straight as a flagpole. He had landed a C-130 on a dirt strip in Afghanistan under enemy fire, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, and flown 32 combat missions. Now he ran a tiny volunteer aviation club for underprivileged kids that no newspaper covered, no politician funded, and no donor noticed. The first time Captain Grant met Isaiah, he gave the boy 10 questions about flight instruments. Isaiah answered all 10 in under 2 minutes. Captain Grant asked 10 more. Isaiah answered those too. Captain Grant leaned back, folded his arms, and said, "Boy, "Who taught you all this?" Isaiah replied. "Nobody, sir. I taught myself." Captain Grant was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke 5 words that changed everything. "I am going to teach you." Over many months, Captain Grant trained Isaiah on a full-motion A320 simulator donated to the community center. Hundreds of hours, every weekend, every holiday. Captain Grant taught him not just how to fly, but how to think, how to stay calm when instruments screamed, how to trust his hands when his eyes failed, how to breathe when the world fell apart. Before their final session, Captain Grant gave Isaiah a hand-carved wooden model of an A320 with 5 words etched into the belly. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." Isaiah kept that model in his backpack every single day. It was the only thing he owned that truly meant anything. At 16, Isaiah won a STEM scholarship. The organization was flying him from Miami to Chicago for orientation at a prestigious aviation academy, his first time on a real airplane. He walked through this gate in a faded gray t-shirt, second-hand sneakers, and a backpack held together with duct tape. He was smiling. He had no idea that soon everything about this flight and his life was about to change forever. The moment Isaiah stepped onto the jet bridge, he felt it. A shift in the air, a silent wall of judgment. The businessman in front of him glanced back, looked him up and down, then pulled his carry-on closer to his chest as if something might go missing. A mother nudged her daughter to the other side. No one said a word. No one had to. Isaiah kept his head down and walked to his seat in the last row, wedged against the window next to the lavatory. The seat did not recline. The overhead bin above it was already stuffed with someone else's luggage. Isaiah did not complain. He slid in, placed his backpack on his lap, and pressed his forehead against the cold window. Outside, the ground crew was loading bags in the rain. He watched them and thought about Captain Grant, about the simulator, about Chicago. For the first time in his life, something good was happening. Then he heard a voice. "Excuse me?" A woman was standing in the aisle staring at him. She was in her early 60s, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere blazer, pearl earrings, and a leather handbag worth more than everything Isaiah had ever owned combined. Her name was Victoria Langford. She sat on the boards of several charities in Palm Beach. She had never in her life ridden in economy class, but today first class was full, and she had been downgraded. She was already furious, and now she was looking at Isaiah like she had just found a cockroach on her dinner plate. "Is that your seat?" she asked. Not politely, not curiously. The way someone asks a stray dog how it got inside. Isaiah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She scanned him. The worn t-shirt, the taped backpack, the second-hand sneakers with a hole near the toe. Then she turned to a passing flight attendant, a tall blonde woman named Melissa Crane, and said in a voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, "I need you to check this boy's boarding pass. There is absolutely no way he paid for this ticket." Isaiah's stomach dropped. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his boarding pass, and held it up. His hand was steady, but his heart slammed against his ribs. Melissa Crane took the pass. She studied it. She looked at Isaiah. She looked at Victoria. Then she handed it back and said flatly, "It's valid." But Victoria was not satisfied. She leaned forward and whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I know how these people get tickets, stolen credit cards, fake identities. You should check the system again. I do not feel safe sitting near him." The words hit Isaiah like a slap. He said nothing. He put the boarding pass back in his pocket, turned to the window, and stared at the rain. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. A woman sitting across the aisle, Elena Vargas, a nurse from Atlanta, watched the whole scene. She leaned over and said softly, "Don't let her steal your joy. Steal your joy, sweetheart. You belong here just like everyone else." Isaiah looked at her. He wanted to smile, but could not. He simply nodded. The plane took off. Isaiah watched Miami shrink beneath the clouds. For a short while, he allowed himself to breathe. He pulled out the wooden A320 model and held it in his palm under his backpack where no one could see. He traced the words with his thumb. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." But peace did not last. Victoria Langford called Melissa Crane again. She said her purse felt lighter. She said she had cash when she boarded. She looked directly at Isaiah and said, "I want him searched." Melissa Crane walked to the last row. She did not ask politely. "Stand up. Open your bag." Isaiah stared at her. "What?" "A passenger has reported missing cash. Open your bag now." The cabin went quiet. Heads turned. Passengers in the surrounding rows were all watching. Isaiah stood up slowly. His legs felt like concrete. He unzipped his backpack in full view of everyone, revealing a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a library book about aerodynamics, and the wooden airplane model. No wallet. No cash. Nothing. Melissa Crane looked at the contents. She said nothing. No apology. She simply walked away. Victoria Langford huffed and muttered, "He probably already hid it." A man in a nearby row, a heavy-set businessman in a golf shirt, let out a short laugh and said, "Kid probably never even seen that much money in his life." A few passengers chuckled. Isaiah sat back down. He put the wooden model back in the bag with trembling hands. His eyes burned, but he did not cry. He would not give them that. He pressed his forehead against the window and stared at the clouds rushing past, the same sky that had always been his only home, his only sanctuary. And now, even here, high above the earth, he could not escape what the world thought of him. Elena Vargas reached across the aisle and placed a small packet of tissues on his armrest without a word. Isaiah did not touch them, but he saw them. And for a brief moment, in the middle of all that cruelty, one small act of kindness kept him from breaking. 3 rows ahead, the cockpit door was closed. Behind it, Captain Howard Pierce, a veteran pilot with decades of experience, was rubbing his left arm. A dull ache had been spreading from his chest to his shoulder. He told his co-pilot, Kyle Mercer, a young first officer still early in his career, that it was probably just muscle tension. Kyle nodded and went back to monitoring the instruments. Neither of them knew that a massive storm system was building directly in their flight path. Neither of them knew that soon Captain Pierce's heart would stop beating. And neither of them knew that the only person on this aircraft capable of saving 174 lives was currently sitting in the last row, clutching a wooden airplane, trying not to cry. It happened without warning. A sound like a muffled explosion tore through the cabin. The plane lurched violently to the right. Overhead bins flew open. Bags tumbled into the aisle. Drinks spilled across laps. The lights flickered once, twice, then went dark for several seconds before the emergency strips along the floor glowed a pale, sickly green. Passengers screamed. Children wailed. The seatbelt sign dinged on with sharp metallic urgency. Then the plane dropped. Not a gentle dip, but a free fall. Stomachs rose into throats. A woman several rows ahead vomited into her hands. The man in the golf shirt who had laughed at Isaiah was now gripping his armrest with both hands, whimpering like a child. Victoria Langford screamed so loud her voice cracked. Isaiah did not scream. His fingers were wrapped around the armrest, knuckles white. But his eyes were different. They were moving, scanning, calculating. He felt the angle of the descent. He heard the change in engine pitch. The left engine was still roaring. Steady, normal, but the right engine sounded wrong. A grinding, stuttering whine that rose and fell like a dying animal. Isaiah knew that sound. He had heard it hundreds of times in the simulator. Compressor stall, stage 2. The plane stabilized briefly. The intercom crackled. Kyle Mercer's voice came through, shaky, thin, trying to sound professional, but failing badly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing severe turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control. Isaiah knew he was lying. Everything was not under control. The A320 was not designed to shake like this from turbulence alone. Something was wrong with the right engine, and the brief stabilization meant the autopilot had kicked in. But if the engine failed completely, the autopilot would not be enough. Not in this storm. Moments later, the plane shook again, harder. The overhead oxygen masks deployed in several rows. More screaming. A flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, grabbing headrests for balance, her face white as paper. Then the cockpit door opened. Melissa Crane rushed in. She came back out seconds later. Her face had changed. The professional mask was gone. What was underneath was raw animal fear. She grabbed another flight attendant and whispered something. The other attendant's hand flew to her mouth. They both looked toward the cockpit like they were staring at a coffin. Isaiah watched every movement. He read their body language the way Captain Grant had taught him to read instruments, with precision and without emotion. The captain was down. He was certain of it now. Melissa Crane picked up the intercom. Her voice trembled. If there is any passenger on board with flight experience, any experience at all, please identify yourself to a crew member immediately. Silence. 174 passengers, and not a single hand went up. The businessman in the golf shirt stared at his shoes. Victoria Langford clutched her pearls and whispered prayers to a god she only remembered in emergencies. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Except Isaiah. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up and began walking toward the front of the aircraft. Elena Varga saw him rise. Her eyes widened. She whispered, "Isaiah, what are you doing?" He did not answer. He just walked. Steady, straight. One hand brushing the overhead bins for balance as the plane shuddered beneath him. Passengers watched him pass. A teenager, a black teenager in a faded t-shirt, walking toward the cockpit of a dying airplane. Some stared in confusion, some in disbelief. An elderly man grabbed his wrist and said, "Sit down, son. This is not the time for games." Isaiah gently removed the man's hand and kept walking. He reached the front galley. Melissa Crane saw him, and her expression shifted from fear to fury. She stepped in front of the cockpit door, blocking it with her body, and that was when she shoved him backward and hissed the words we already heard. "A filthy little brat like you dares to rush into the cockpit. You want to kill everyone faster. Is that it?" Isaiah stood still. The plane dropped again. Melissa stumbled. Passengers screamed. And in that chaos, Isaiah spoke for the first time since the crisis began. His voice was low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "The right engine has a stage 2 compressor stall. Your autopilot is compensating, but it will fail soon in this wind shear. Your captain is unconscious or dead, and your first officer has very little experience on this type. If you do not let me through that door, everyone on this plane will die, including you." Melissa Crane froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She stared at Isaiah like she was seeing him for the first time. Her mind was trying to reconcile two realities: the filthy little brat she had shoved moments ago, and the boy who had just diagnosed the aircraft's engine failure with surgical precision. Behind her, the cockpit door was ajar. Through the gap, Isaiah could see it. Captain Howard Pierce slumped sideways in the left seat, his body held in place only by the shoulder harness. His face was gray. His arms hung limp. On the right side, Kyle Mercer was gripping the yoke with both hands, sweat pouring down his temples, his eyes darting across the instrument panel like a student who had walked into the wrong exam. The master caution light was flashing. The engine warning display for the right power plant was pulsing red, and through the windshield, there was nothing but black. A wall of storm clouds lit by flashes of lightning that made the cockpit glow like the inside of a strobe. The plane dropped again, hard. Melissa grabbed the doorframe. From the cabin behind them came a fresh wave of screaming. Louder, more desperate, more primal than before. Isaiah looked at Melissa. He did not repeat himself. He did not beg. He simply said, "Move." And she did. Isaiah stepped into the cockpit. The smell hit him first. Sweat, vomit, and the sharp metallic tang of electrical systems under stress. Captain Pierce's body was heavy and still. Isaiah did not look at the captain's face. He could not afford to feel anything right now. He turned to Kyle Mercer. Kyle saw him, and his reaction was immediate. "What the? Who let you in here? Get out. This is a restricted area." His voice was high-pitched, cracking at the edges. His hands were shaking on the yoke so badly that the control inputs were jerking the plane left and right in micro-corrections that only made the turbulence worse. Isaiah sat down in the observer seat behind the center console. He spoke clearly. "Your vertical speed indicator is showing a significant descent. You are descending, and you do not realize it. Pull back gently, 2 degrees, nose up. Do it now." Kyle stared at him. "You're a kid. A kid. Get out of my cockpit before I—" The ground proximity warning system interrupted him. A robotic female voice filled the cockpit. "Sync rate! Sync rate!" Kyle's face went white. He yanked the yoke back. Too hard. Too fast. The nose pitched up aggressively. Isaiah felt the G-force press him into the seat. The airspeed dropped. The stick shaker activated. A violent rattling that meant the aircraft was approaching a stall. "Release pressure," Isaiah shouted. "You are going to stall the aircraft. Nose down 2 degrees. Add thrust on the left engine now." Kyle hesitated for one agonizing second, then obeyed. The nose dipped. The stick shaker stopped. The airspeed climbed back to a safe margin. The cockpit was quiet for a few seconds, 3 seconds of pure, fragile stability. Kyle turned and looked at Isaiah. Really looked at him. His arrogance was cracking. Fear was eating through it like acid through paper. He whispered, "How do you know this?" Isaiah did not answer the question. Instead, he said, "Your captain needs to be moved. I need the left seat, and I need you to contact ATC on frequency 121.5 and declare a mayday. Can you do that?" Kyle shook his head, not in refusal, but in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. How old are you?" 16. "And I have hundreds of hours on the A320 full motion simulator. I know every system on this aircraft, every emergency procedure, every checklist. You can either let me help you, or you can fly this plane into the ground. You have very little time to decide." The plane shuddered. Lightning cracked outside so close the cockpit lights flickered. The right engine display now read 0 thrust. It was completely dead. The A320 was flying on one engine in the middle of one of the worst storm systems over the southeastern United States in years. Kyle looked at Captain Pierce's unconscious body. He looked at the instrument panel screaming warnings at him. He looked at his own hands, still trembling. And then he looked at the 16-year-old boy sitting behind him with the calmest eyes he had ever seen in his life. He unbuckled Captain Pierce's harness. Isaiah helped him ease the captain's body out of the left seat and onto the cockpit floor. Elena Vargas, the nurse from earlier, appeared at the cockpit door. She did not ask questions. She knelt beside the captain and began checking his pulse, his breathing, his pupils. She looked up at Isaiah and shook her head slowly. Isaiah understood, but he could not stop now. He slid into the captain's seat. His hands rested on the yoke. His feet found the rudder pedals. For one brief second, everything went quiet in his mind. The screaming cabin, the howling wind, the flashing warnings, all of it faded. And he was back in the community center in Overtown, sitting beside Captain Grant, hearing the old man's voice. Feel the airplane. It talks to you through the yoke, through the pedals, through the seat of your pants. Listen, and it will tell you what it needs. Isaiah pressed the radio button. Miami Center, this is Flight 2136. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Captain is incapacitated. First officer is in the right seat. I have assumed command from the left seat. We have lost the right engine, currently on one engine in severe weather. Requesting emergency vectors and nearest available runway. Over. There was a pause on the other end. A long pause. Then a voice, controlled, professional, but unmistakably stunned, responded. Flight 2136, Miami Center copies your mayday. Please confirm who is speaking. State your qualifications. Isaiah looked at the instrument panel. He looked at the storm raging outside. He looked at the wooden A320 model he had pulled from his backpack and placed on the glare shield above the instruments, the only co-pilot he had ever trusted. Then he keyed the mic and said, "My name is Isaiah Ellison. I am 16 years old. I have no license, but I can fly this airplane. And right now, I am the best chance these people have." Another pause, longer this time. Then the controller's voice returned, steady, deliberate, and carrying a weight of decision that would define careers. Copy, Isaiah. We are with you. Turning you left, heading 290. Descend and maintain flight level 250. We are clearing a path. You are not alone up there. Isaiah turned the yoke gently to the left. The aircraft responded, smooth, obedient, alive. Behind him, 174 people were holding their breath without knowing that their lives now rested in the hands of a boy the world had told to sit down. He was not sitting down. The news traveled through the cabin like wildfire. A flight attendant whispered to another. A passenger overheard, then another. Within minutes, every person on Flight 2136 knew. The captain was gone, the co-pilot could not handle the aircraft, and a 16-year-old boy was flying the plane. A man in a forward row stood up and shouted, "A child is flying this plane! This is insane!" A woman hyperventilated into a paper bag. The heavy-set businessman in the golf shirt stormed toward the cockpit. "I am not letting some ghetto kid crash this airplane," he yelled. Melissa Crane blocked him. For the first time that night, she was not blocking Isaiah. She was protecting him. Something had shifted behind her eyes. She had watched this boy diagnose a compressor stall that a trained first officer missed. She had heard him talk to air traffic control steadier than any adult on this aircraft. She did not understand it, but she knew he was the only reason they were still in the air. "Sir, sit down," she said. Her voice was ice. "Now." The man sat. Inside the cockpit, Isaiah was focused. His eyes moved in a precise pattern. Airspeed, altitude, heading, engine instruments, repeating every few seconds. Captain Grant had drilled this into him until it became reflex. Kyle Mercer sat in his right seat, following Isaiah's instructions, adjusting thrust, reading checklists. He had stopped questioning. He was watching a teenager fly an A320 on one engine through a violent storm with the precision of a 30-year veteran, and he had no explanation for it. Kyle keyed the radio. "Miami Center, Flight 2136, requesting weather updates for alternates within a reasonable radius." The controller responded. But before the weather update, he said something unexpected. "Flight 2136, stand by. We have someone requesting to speak directly with your left seat." A click. Static. Then a voice. Old, deep, steady as bedrock. "Isaiah, this is Captain Grant." Isaiah's hands froze on the yoke. For the first time since he entered the cockpit, His composure cracked. His breath caught. His eyes stung. He swallowed hard. "Captain Grant, how did you—" "The FAA called me. They traced your name through the Scholarship Foundation. Wanted to know if you were real." A pause. Then, with a warmth that cut through the static like sunlight through clouds, Captain Grant said, "I told them you are the most gifted pilot I have trained in 50 years of flying. Hundreds of hours on the A320 simulator, near perfect proficiency rating. And I told them, if my own life depended on one pilot landing that aircraft tonight, I would choose you over every captain in every airline on Earth." Silence in the cockpit. Kyle stared at the radio, mouth open. Through the cracked door, Melissa Crane was listening, her hand over her mouth, eyes wet. Isaiah closed his eyes for 1 second. He saw Captain Grant in the community center, the old man's hands guiding his on the simulator yoke, the patient voice counting through crosswind corrections, the wooden plane on the console between them. Every lesson, every Saturday, when the world forgot he existed, but one man did not. He opened his eyes and keyed the mic. "Copy, Captain. I will bring them home." Captain Grant replied with 5 words, the same 5 words etched into the wooden model sitting on the glare shield right now. "The sky doesn't care, son." Isaiah nodded. He could not speak. He did not need to. He adjusted heading 2 degrees left, trimmed the elevator, and flew. In the cabin, 174 people were silent for the first time since the crisis began. The word was spreading row by row, whisper by whisper, that the boy in the cockpit had been trained by a decorated Air Force war hero, that this boy was not a fraud, not a thief, not a street kid playing games, that he might be the most extraordinary person on this airplane. And Victoria Langford, sitting in her row, mascara streaking down her cheeks, was hearing every word. She remembered every accusation, every sneer, every whispered insult. And for the first time in her life, the shame she felt was not for someone else. It was for herself. Isaiah had control of the aircraft. But control was not the same as safety. And safety was still very far away. Miami Center delivered the news like a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis. Calm, precise, and devastating. Flight 2136. Chicago O'Hare is closed due to severe weather. Midway is closed. Nearest available runway is a small airport in northwestern Alabama. Runway 18, length 5,200 feet. Kyle heard the number, and his face drained of color. He turned to Isaiah. 5,200 feet, Isaiah. The minimum landing distance for an A320 on one engine, wet runway, is at least 5,800. That is 600 feet short. It is not possible. Isaiah said nothing. His eyes were on the instruments. His mind was running calculations. Ground speed, descent rate, wind component, aircraft weight, remaining fuel. He keyed the mic. Miami Center. Confirm runway surface condition. Runway 18. Wet, moderate standing water. Crosswind component 15 knots. Gusting 22. Visibility 1/4 mile in heavy rain. Ceiling 200 feet. Kyle shook his head. This is suicide. We should divert further south and wait for what? Isaiah's voice was quiet, but it cut through the cockpit like a blade. We have fuel for less than an hour. The storm system extends hundreds of miles south. There is no further south. There is only that runway. Kyle opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer because there was no answer. That runway, too short, too wet, too dark, was the only piece of Earth between Flight 2136 and the ocean. Isaiah began the approach briefing. He did it from memory, word for word, as Captain Grant had taught him. Single-engine approach, runway 18. I will fly a manual ILS. Gear down at 1,000 feet. Flaps full at 500. Target speed 132 knots. Touchdown zone first 300 feet. Maximum reverse thrust on the left engine immediately on contact. Manual braking. No auto brake. I need to feel the wheels. Kyle wrote every word down with a hand that would not stop shaking. Isaiah descended. Through lower altitudes, each 1,000 feet bringing them closer to the storm's violent core. The turbulence that was brutal at altitude became savage below the clouds. The A320 bucked and heaved like a living creature, trying to throw them off its back. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel hitting glass. Lightning struck so close that the cockpit filled with white light, and the electromagnetic pulse sent a momentary spike across 3 instrument displays. Isaiah did not flinch. His hands made constant micro-adjustments. A degree left, half a degree right, a touch of trim, a nudge of thrust. He was not fighting the storm. He was listening to it, reading its rhythm, finding the gaps between the gusts the way a boxer finds gaps between punches. At 12,000 feet, the second crisis hit, a loud bang from the left engine. The thrust fluctuated, dropped, surged, dropped again. The engine was not dead, but it was sick. The N1 gauge was fluctuating between 78 and 84%. Unstable, unreliable. The only engine they had left was now coughing like a man with pneumonia running a marathon. Kyle saw the gauge, and his composure finally broke. No, we cannot lose the left engine, Isaiah. If we lose the left engine, we are a glider, a 150,000-pound glider with no place to land. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He pulled the thrust lever back slightly, reducing strain on the engine, accepting a slower speed, trading power for survival. It was a gamble. Less thrust meant a steeper descent rate. A steeper descent rate meant less time to correct on final approach. Less time meant less margin for error on a runway that already had no margin. He keyed the mic. His voice had not changed. Still low, still steady, still terrifyingly calm. Miami Center, 2136, left engine showing N1 fluctuation. I am reducing thrust to stabilize. Request you clear all traffic and have emergency services standing by at full deployment. We are coming in hot and short. The controller's response was immediate. Copy 2136. All traffic cleared. Emergency vehicles are rolling. Isaiah, the whole building is listening. Bring them home. Lower, now. The clouds swallowed the aircraft whole. Visibility dropped to nothing. Isaiah was flying entirely on instruments, the attitude indicator, the glide slope, the localizer. 3 small lines on a screen telling him where the Earth was, where the runway was, and whether he would reach it alive. In the cabin, the passengers could feel the descent, the pressure in their ears, the increasing violence of the turbulence, the awful grinding sound from the left engine that everyone could hear, but no one dared name. A flight attendant moved through the aisle, checking seatbelts, her lips moving in silent prayer. Elena Vargas was still kneeling beside Captain Pierce's body in the cockpit doorway. She had covered his face with a blanket. There was nothing more she could do for him. Victoria Langford was clutching the armrests with both hands, her knuckles bone white. The pearls she had worn so proudly were scattered on the floor. The string had broken when the plane dropped earlier. She did not care about them anymore. She was staring at the cockpit door, and behind that door was the boy she had accused of being a thief, the boy whose bag she had demanded be searched, the boy she had wanted thrown off this plane, and now she was praying, not to God, not to the pilot, but to him, to Isaiah. The boy she had tried to destroy was the only one trying to save her. Lower still. Isaiah called for gear down. Kyle moved the lever. 3 green lights illuminated. Landing gear locked. The drag increased immediately. The airspeed dropped. Isaiah adjusted thrust carefully, nursing the sick engine like a doctor keeping a patient alive long enough to reach the operating table. Flaps 1. The aircraft configuration changed. More lift, more drag, slower speed. The approach was stabilizing. Barely. Lower. Isaiah could see nothing through the windshield but black rain and occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the clouds from within like the nervous system of some enormous dying creature. Even lower. The radio altimeter began counting down. 1,000. 900. 800. The synthetic voice was mechanical, emotionless. A machine counting the distance between life and death with perfect indifference. "Flaps full," Isaiah called. His voice was a whisper now, not from fear, from focus. Every atom of his being was concentrated on 3 instruments, 2 hands, and 1 runway he could not see. 500 feet. The glide slope was centered. The localizer was centered. Airspeed 134 knots, 2 knots fast, but acceptable. The left engine was still fluctuating, but holding. 300 feet. Still nothing through the windshield. Kyle was gripping the edge of his seat. His breathing was rapid and shallow. He whispered, "Come on, come on." 200 feet. Decision height. This was the moment. If Isaiah could not see the runway, he would have to go around, climb back into the storm on a dying engine with dwindling fuel. There would not be a second chance. Isaiah stared through the windshield. Rain. Black. Nothing. 150 feet. Nothing. 100 feet. And then 2 rows of white lights pierced through the rain like the fingers of God reaching up from the earth. Runway 18 dead ahead, exactly where it should be. Isaiah whispered, "Runway in sight." He disconnected the autopilot. His hands were the aircraft now. He felt every gust through the yoke, every crosswind through the rudder pedals. The runway rushed up at him, short, narrow, glistening with rain. He pulled the thrust lever to idle. The left engine spooled down. The nose dropped slightly. The main wheels reached for the concrete. Contact. The impact was firm but controlled. The tires barked against the wet surface, sending twin rooster tails of water into the black air behind them. Isaiah slammed full reverse thrust on the left engine. The roar filled the cockpit like a living thing. He pressed the brake pedals, hard, steady, progressive. The anti-skid system chattered beneath his feet. The aircraft decelerated. The end of the runway was visible now, a line of red lights growing closer, closer, closer. The A320 stopped, 82 feet from the end of the runway. 82 feet between 174 lives and the darkness beyond. Isaiah's hands were still on the yoke. His feet were still on the pedals. He was breathing. The engine was winding down. Rain hammered the fuselage, and then silence. A silence so complete it felt holy. Kyle turned to him. His face was white, his eyes red, his lips trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He simply stared at the 16-year-old boy sitting in the captain's seat, who had just done what no instructor, no examiner, no airline captain would have believed possible. Isaiah reached up and took the wooden A320 model from the glare shield. He held it in both hands. His fingers were shaking now. For the first time all night, his fingers were finally shaking. He looked at the 5 words carved into the belly. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." He closed his eyes, and for the first time since his mother died, Isaiah Ellison allowed himself to cry. For 3 full seconds, the cabin was silent. Not a breath. Not a whisper. 174 people frozen in the space between terror and disbelief. Then Elena Vargas started clapping. 1 pair of hands, slow, deliberate, steady, like a heartbeat returning to life. Then a second pair joined, a third, a fourth. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted. Passengers were standing, clapping, screaming, sobbing, hugging strangers they had ignored hours earlier. A grown man in a business suit was weeping into his hands. A mother was squeezing her daughter so tightly the child gasped. The elderly man who had grabbed Isaiah's wrist in the aisle was now pressing both palms together and bowing his head toward the cockpit door as if he were praying to something sacred. The heavy-set businessman in the golf shirt, the one who had laughed, the one who had said Isaiah had never seen that much money, was standing motionless in the aisle. His face was blank. His mouth was open. Tears were running down his cheeks, and he did not bother to wipe them. He was staring at the cockpit door, and he could not move. Melissa Crane stepped into the cockpit. She looked at Isaiah, still in the captain's seat, the wooden model in his trembling hands, tears streaming silently down his face. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the cockpit floor, covered her face with both hands, and sobbed. Deep, broken, shaking sobs that came from somewhere she had never allowed anyone to see. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She could not. The words were too small for what she had done and what she had witnessed. Kyle unbuckled his harness, stood up, and did something no first officer is trained to do. He extended his hand to Isaiah, not as a co-pilot to a passenger, but as one aviator to another. Isaiah looked at the hand. He took it. Kyle held on for a long time and said quietly, "I have never seen anything like that in my life, and I never will again." Outside, red and blue lights flashed through the rain. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. The door opened. Cold, wet air flooded the cabin. Isaiah Ellison was still sitting in the captain's seat. He was 16 years old. He had no license, no uniform, no rank. But tonight, he had outflown the storm, outflown the odds, and outflown every lie the world had ever told about him. The paramedics reached the cockpit first. They carried Captain Howard Pierce's body out on a stretcher, his face covered with a white sheet. As he passed through the cabin, passengers bowed their heads. Isaiah watched from the captain's seat until the stretcher disappeared. He whispered, "Rest easy, Captain." No one heard him. Isaiah stepped out of the cockpit. The moment he appeared in the cabin doorway, the applause erupted, louder, rawer than before. Passengers reached for him as he walked down the aisle. Hands touched his shoulders, his arms. Strangers said, "Thank you," with voices that broke halfway through. A little girl in a forward row held out a teddy bear. Isaiah knelt, smiled, and gently pushed it back into her arms. "You keep him safe," he said. Elena Vargas was waiting at her row. She pulled him into an embrace so tight he could not breathe. She held him for 20 seconds without a word. When she let go, her scrubs were wet with his tears. Then he saw Victoria Langford. She was standing in the aisle. Her cashmere blazer was wrinkled. Mascara had carved black rivers down both cheeks. Her pearls were gone. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Isaiah, and something collapsed inside her. Something built over 60 years of certainty about who mattered and who did not. She stepped forward. Her mouth trembled. She tried to speak 3 times before the words came. "I am so sorry for what I said, for what I did to you." Her voice cracked. "You saved my life, and I treated you like you were nothing." Isaiah looked at her. He had every right to turn away, but he did not. He nodded once and said, "I forgive you, ma'am. I hope you remember this next time you see someone who looks like me." Victoria's knees buckled. She collapsed into the nearest seat, burying her face in her hands, crying harder than she had ever cried. Not for herself. For the first time in her life, not for herself. By morning, the story was everywhere. Every network, every front page, Age every feed. CNN ran it. 16-year-old Orphan lands crippled jet, saves 174 lives. The clip of Isaiah's Mayday call leaked within hours. His calm voice saying words that would be replayed millions of times. I have no license, but I can fly this airplane. Social media erupted. Hashtag Isaiah Ellison trended #1 worldwide. Hashtag The Sky Doesn't Care became a movement. The airline announced a full scholarship, not just flight school, but a 4-year aerospace engineering degree at any university of his choosing. 3 major airlines offered him a guaranteed cadet position the day he turned 18. The FAA opened a review, not to punish him, but to study how a self-taught teenager performed a landing. Their own simulations later confirmed had very low odds of success. Captain Theodore Grant watched the press conference from his living room in Overtown. The video of Alyssa Crane shoving Isaiah in the galley, captured by a passenger's phone through a crack in the curtain, went viral the same week, amassing tens of millions of views. The comments were merciless, but Isaiah never shared it, never mentioned it. When a reporter asked him about Melissa, he said only, "She was scared. We were all scared. I hope she finds peace." That single sentence got more shares than the video itself. There is a moment on the Cockpit audio the FAA released months later that most people miss the first time they hear it. It comes right after Isaiah's Mayday call, right after he tells Miami Center his name and age. There is a brief pause of dead air, and then, very faintly, you can hear him exhale. Just one breath. Steady, controlled. The breath of a boy who already knew he could do this, who always knew, but had never been given the chance to prove it. That breath is the entire story, because Isaiah Ellison did not become extraordinary on Flight 2136. He was extraordinary long before he stepped onto that plane. He was extraordinary in the library as a child, reading manuals no one assigned him. He was extraordinary in the community center as a teenager, flying simulators no one knew existed. He was extraordinary every single day. He woke up in a system that forgot him and chose to learn anyway. The airplane did not make him. It simply revealed what was already there. And that is the question this story leaves with every one of us. How many Isaiahs are out there right now? Brilliant, gifted, extraordinary, sitting in the last row, wearing second-hand shoes, being told they do not belong? How many are being searched, doubted, shoved aside, and dismissed before they ever get the chance to show what they can do? How many talents has this world already lost because someone looked at the outside and decided they already knew what was inside? The sky does not care what color you are. The sky does not care how much money your parents had. The sky only asks one question: can you fly? Isaiah Ellison can fly. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever been judged before you were given a chance? Subscribe so you never miss a story like this again. And remember, the sky does not care. Neither should we.